Hi, guys. I'm Madison Anderson. I own a freelance writing business. I'm a four-time published poet, and I write blogs on marketing yourself and gaining your professional image. And you're watching John the Ninja.
Ladies and gentlemen, how you doing? It's John the Ninja back in the dojo, aka the dojo. If you don't know, it's the John the Ninja Studios. I should slap you myself, and I would if I could. But more importantly, I have a very nice young lady who I've known since she was probably literally this tall. But it's crazy because after I reached out to her to see how she was doing and what's happening, I was totally blown away by the amount and just the sheer resume she has built for herself. She's only 22 years old, but I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, she's not just a writer. She's been working with CEOs, she's been doing interviews, she's been working on films, and I'm sitting here like, what have I done with my life? But joking on the side, I have Miss Madison Anderson, who I went to school with at Cumberland Christian in New Jersey, and now she is a businesswoman in Kentucky, a freelance writer that will help you with your business. And how, honestly, she says more so the marketing and social media, but at this point, after seeing her resume, she could do it all for you. She could do the finances, the booking. So Maddie, I'm bringing her on to chop it up and see how life's been treating her. How you been, mademoiselle?
I have been amazing. How have you been?
You know what, we'll talk about that later. It's been a very fun, interesting life God has blessed me with. But all right, so I gotta break character because I'm having too much fun. I'm doing well, mademoiselle. So first things first, we were talking before we started recording. Your voice is throwing me off, and I was trying to remember the last time I saw you and your family in New Jersey before you guys moved.
I remember seeing you at a Wawa, and that's
Yes.
the last recollection I had. But that
So
was like 4 or 5 years ago. But I'm sure we started knowing each other when I was like a child.
so it's definitely probably like 2017, 2018 when you guys checked out. Because I haven't worked for a while, at least a full year or two at this point. Because I was trying to do my taxes, I couldn't figure it out. But
Yeah.
I do remember. So, quick story, synopsis from what we know of your dad, because your dad was cool as hell.
Yes.
He was number one. So, our teacher, Mr. Anderson, her father, ladies and gentlemen, he was a substitute teacher at our school. He was just chilling. It's like, yo, let's do this. And then rest of class, we were talking sports, we were talking life. He's like a pastor, so it was really cool. And then he became a teacher, and things went downhill. And I don't, and I don't think it was for him. I think it was just stressful having to deal with the kids every day. But no, I met Maddie through his wife and uh, him. I don't know why I was gonna add another person. I don't think you have a brother, do you?
No,
Okay,
only
awesome. But I gotta say, your mom, especially your mom and dad, were always cool with me. Like always kind, no issues. You know that school has a reputation for certain
yes.
things,
Yes. It was
and
a
a lot
very
of.
interesting environment.
So I always appreciated that. I always keep in mind people that have always outstretched their hands, give me advice, give me the time of day, just to have a normal conversation aside from me being the fun, energetic cat I usually am. Let's bring it up there first. All right. So you guys moved. Where did you move to? Was it Kentucky or did you go to a different spot?
August of 2020, we decided we were going to move to Kentucky because one, I decided I wanted to go to Asbury University in Wilmore, Kentucky. And my dad was also attending seminary at the time. And to graduate from seminary, you have to take so many in-person classes. So instead of me just kind of packing up and going to Kentucky to live, they decided it was a family event. So we decided all to move to Kentucky, and I started my career in undergrad, and my dad continued his seminary schooling.
That's fascinating because that's why I reached out to you initially. I saw that he got his degree and now he's going for his doctorate.
And he's going for like the coolest thing ever. It's a PhD in intercultural studies in with an emphasis in pop culture. And I'm like, of course that's my dad, because he's just like, it's not like something boring, it's something very engaging and fun. And I'm like, of course he'd want to write about that.
Well, he's always had a keen eye for that. It's weird because I always pull this out of my head once in a while. We had a chapel, guys, we had chapel in school. That was like a Wednesday tradition. We had a chapel where he was trying to convey this idea of how society is either entering a form of degradation morally, or more so like, hey, the thinking is becoming more loose. And it was
Yeah.
pretty much him talking about how, like, on TV shows when he was a kid, you never saw a mom and dad in the same bed. And now, and then he progressed it to that time period, which I was probably like in high school or middle school at the time. Like, oh, you got people crazy and stuff like that. And he was struggling to try and get the idea out, but it was already put out there. Like, it's not so much like, hey, this is the problem. Just be aware of where society is going. and how you
Yes.
can adapt to it. So I always, that makes perfect sense that he's still studying along those lines.
Yeah.
So what year are you? Did you graduate yet? Okay, congrats.
Thank you. So I graduated with my undergrad in journalism and creative writing in April. Then in I think August, my classes start for my graduate degree in communication. Over my undergrad, thank God, because that was getting it gets to a point just like high school where you're just taking filler classes and you have this senioritis and you're like, I'm doing way more in my free time than I am for my degree. So I just need to cut it. Get me out.
You're a writer, and you stated that you physically can't write in one genre, and it's a need to do it. I have that same feeling when it comes to creating music, or at least sound. You know, my friends in college hated me because I'd have these same drumsticks. I would pretend to air drum, and then I would hit the desk, and they'd freak out like, "Bro, it's like 3 in the morning." But from a music standpoint, I sympathize with a lot of artists when it's like, hey, you have a riff in your head and you just have to physically hear it out of the body. You have to hear it on an instrument. So could you walk me through how you initially came into writing and it became more than just a hobby and you knew like, hey, I have this in me. I have to force these words out.
So, starting from the beginning, I always hated writing and reading. I always found my way out of it. I was that person that would enter into any sort of English or literature class and say, I am never going to use this. I'm never going to write. And the world provides so much irony in that case because I went to Asbury and I was going to study a media communication degree. So basically, I had no passion for anything in my life when I came to Asbury. I just thought they have a good media comm program. I'm going to be able to hold a camera for 38 grand a year and barely scrape by, and I'll get the money that I need. And so all of a sudden, I take this writing for media class in my first freshman semester, and it's a foundation class for every undergrad. Everyone has to take it. So I get to the journalism part of it, and all of a sudden we're writing these super kind of fun for me. I always liked writing in a way where I knew that I was good at it, but I also hated doing it. So the idea that I was good at it kind of made me draw towards it a little more during my undergrad years. But I started writing this opinion editorial, which is basically a commentary in the newspaper. And so I wrote that opinion editorial for my professor, and he looked at it and he was like, "This is really good. Like, did you have any help doing this? Like, how did you do this?" And I said, "No, I took a weekend and I wrote it, and it was kind of fun to write. So is it good?" And he was like, it's fantastic. Like, we need to get this published in a local newspaper. And that's what we did. It ended up being published in the Jessamine Journal around here. And so he was like, "Okay, so you're good at writing and now you've done your first writing project. How do you feel about switching to journalism?" And I said to him verbatim, I said, "I have no plan for my life, so I would love to switch to journalism. Let's do it." The next probably day or so, I had the paper in my hand that I was going to switch my major. And after I switched my major, all of a sudden, I was writing constantly. I was getting involved. He actually hooked me up with a job on the college newspaper, writing news articles, and then I branched off into my several other writing jobs because I've tried to front load my schedule and every ability that I could during the first year or so of college. So then once I started hitting those job opportunities and writing more and more, that's when it turned into, oh, I'm realizing I like this, so I need to do this more because I'm enjoying it so much. This isn't just something that I need to push off and produce and then move away. So I really value what you say about music because, shockingly enough, it's very like music in a sense where you hear something buzzing in your head and you just you need to somehow write it down or get it out before it escapes. So a lot of times I've described this to people where I know when it's a good writing day or not because I wake up with a sense of something's in my head and I can't get it out. Like I'm not, I can hear that there are words in my head and they're buzzing around. I'm not fully conscious of it yet, and I don't know how they're going to work, but something's there and I need to sit down and write. So I feel like that's, maybe that's what you experience with music.
Personally, for me, it's usually random times. Like I've had some of the best riffs, or at least noodles I've written where I'm in bed. I'm thinking, all of a sudden it's in my head. It's in my head, and it's do or die at that point because you're so tired physically. You don't want to get up and write it, but then in your head you're like, this is so good. And that's how I translate it to writers, even on a given day. Like, you know what it's like to get the mental block and just, hey, I'm trying to get this out. I was just yesterday, I was on the bass with my guitar teacher, and there is a note in my head that does not exist in reality.
Mhm.
But me and him played maybe 10, 15 minutes trying to find the next note of this lick he created right then and there. But in my head, I'm like, dude, something's just not, these aren't the notes. And it's like, it exists somehow, some way, but realistically, in the grand scheme of reality, it doesn't. So
That's exactly how I feel about like poetry too. Like you hit it on the nose perfectly. Like if I'm going to write a poem, I have a specific line. I have so many horrible notes app like writings of lines where I'm just driving in my car and I have to speak it into my notes app. And all of a sudden, like you hear this line and you hear yourself say this line, and you're like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this yet, but I know this is going to be something like very good if I take the time to work on it.
let's go to the poetry because I have a fascination with it, but I never really dived into poetry past college. What type of poetry did you gather yourself like this is what I want to do? Because right here, Mira, I can say that you four published already, and you got My Words Sounded of Marquette something cherries. I can't say it. You gotta help me.
My words sounded of maraschino cherries.
Oh,
Yes. I found poetry maybe 2 years ago, and I didn't, again, one of those things where I did not like it. I always failed the poetry sections in all of my exams in English. And I met a friend, and he was writing poetry, and I was like, you know what? He looks cool writing poetry. So I'm gonna try writing poetry. And they were obviously all terrible. At first, I look at some of the things I posted, I'm like, oh my goodness, why did I put that online? And and then eventually I just kind of worked on my craft and got better and started getting published. So that's where the 4 times comes in. And then most recently, my book, My Words Sounded of Maraschino Cherries, I decided I was going to do that about a year ago. And it was a very interesting process going through it. So basically, I had no idea what I was going to do for the book. My running title until I would say this January was To Those That Have Left, Dead or Alive. So it was very akin to growing up and the realization that you're growing up. And then all of a sudden I had this instance, which is now kind of the feature poem of the book, where it talks about maraschino cherries and being out on New Year's Eve and drinking a Dirty Shirley Temple with a cherry allergy, because I'm allergic to cherries, real cherries. So I can only get maraschino cherries, which are the artificial type of cherry that goes in Shirley Temples, Dirty Shirleys, really ice cream sundaes, all of that. So that's kind of the theme of that. And the theme of my book mainly deals with, I never like using coming of age, but I say, you find out that you are experiencing adulthood in retrospect. So only when you look back, you realize that you have grown, you have experienced kind of a metamorphosis of sexuality, of relationships, of personal revelation of sorts. So then maraschino cherries comes into it as they are kind of the fake rubbery version of a real thing. So a lot of my poetry book deals with fake fake relationships, like various relationships you try to go through with the aim of fulfillment, but it's just so inauthentic that it doesn't fulfill you like you want it to. So a lot of it is kind of just this dichotomy of, oh, this real thing that exists of love and of desire and of intimacy can also be overshadowed by something fake like a maraschino cherry. So so when I kind of thought about writing my book, that was initially, I wrote that feature poem called Maraschino Cherries. And once I got through the whole poem, I had this line in the poem that said, my words sounded of maraschino cherries. And that was immediately, once I wrote that line down, I was like, that's going to be the title of my book, because it's so important, because maraschino cherries can be anything in your life. It can be the words you say to people when you don't really love someone. Maybe you say I love you, and they're just maraschino cherries, the words I love you, because they're just inauthentic and they don't really matter to you. Or they can be intimacy, or experiencing a relationship with someone just out of convenience. It's really, when you're going into adulthood, it's just so vital to look at what is real and what is fake.
I just reminisce you saying you finding your passion in writing. I remember very vividly when I found radio, and it was like the first time at a radio station where I felt like this is a viable job for me. This is the first time, like, I know the music, I love the music, I love the people here. Like, this is an office setting. This can use all my talents, like all these years of learning this useless knowledge for these rock bands and the history of music. I can finally do it, and I dived head first into it. I ended up getting a mentor. I name him all the time. His name is Marcus, and I've had one of the best DJs in history. I was under the guy, the producer who helped me, fabulous. Everybody there, the staff too, went out of their way to help me, give me interviews, give me any advice. But the way my mentor molded my outlook, my commitment, and the things I was able to accomplish because of his teaching and his relentless, like, hey, you don't want to come in? Well, come in. Like, just constantly in my face, like, what are you doing? Come in. All right, cool, come in. You know, I always look at it as a time of like, hey, that was so formative for when my opportunities showed up. So for you, who were some of those characters in college? It sounds like that professor who said you needed to get published was that one. And was there anybody else along the way as you were learning and like stumbling?
Oh my goodness. There were there were so many, but when I first started out, yes, it was that professor. And for about a handful of months after I began writing, he was the main person that I would go into with every form of writing and kind of show him like, hey, is this good enough? And he would help me through that.
Are you at liberty to say his name?
I would think so. I don't I don't think he'd care. It's Professor Richmanary. He does journalism at Asbury University. So oh my goodness, he was just kind of a crutch for me to lean on when I was still like working out what I was going to do, because only until recently did I figure out my like niche of writing. So I went through everything. So I started out as news writing, and then I moved on to feature writing for the newspaper. And around that time, my other mentor, Abby Laub, she's the director of strategic communications at Asbury. I've worked under her for 3 years, and I started writing for Stratcom way back when. And she has just helped me so much with all of my different writings. She'll read over what I'm doing, press releases or anything outside of Stratcom, but she's the one that introduced me to a lot more kind of public relations magazine editorial content. So I would start writing for the university magazine at that time. And then once I kind of gained credibility on campus and everyone knew me as a writer, I moved up into the commentary section of the university newspaper. And I had a pretty good following base from that like opinion comment section. And everyone was kind of like, some weeks when I wasn't in the paper, like writing for it, I would have multiple people come up to me and they're like, why aren't you in the paper? Like I was waiting for what you were going to write. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so that's good. And I did a lot of sports writing for like game recaps, athlete profiles, etc. So I would say I had many mentors in many different genres of writing. Like just recently, my professor, Rebecca Briley, I mentioned her. She has a pretty hefty section in the acknowledgements page of my poetry book because her desire for authenticity in poetry is just so profound and amazing to me. And I would not have a full collection of poetry, let alone a collection that I am so proud of without her. So everyone that I've met through Asbury or outside of Asbury has really pushed me with encouragement and kind of helping me to lean on them in times where I don't know what I'm doing, or also getting me closer to figuring out what I want to do eventually. So I feel like my mentors are just the top of the line. I don't know.
But no, Mina, I understand. I totally understand because if you watch my YouTube videos, you'll understand the concert resumes. But you get to a point, even if it's not that bad at the time, you're on the you're on the tier of like falling off completely or really making it big. And that little word of encouragement, whether good or bad, it's like, hey, you're effing up, or hey, you're doing excellent. Even if it rolls off your back, like, oh, whatever, in the back of your mind, it does subconsciously keep you going, and it gives you a little bit
Yes.
more.
Mhm.
You said something that resonated with me that I really liked. It is quote, I believe writing is a solidification of the most beautiful form of thinking that desires to be shared and acknowledged, a written form of a person and piece molded into life's mosaic of memories and moments. I was curious when you came up with that, and if there was a personal writing that you ever did that would encompass that thought. For me, I can vividly remember there was a girl. It was craziness. It was God involved. I prayed. Yes, no. God was all over the place. He gave me a shot. I shot my shot. But I just remember thinking at the time, the chances of what I was trying to do were slim to none. So on a last ditch effort, because I don't know why I kept this. I don't even know if it was a promise. It was more like a statement. I try not to promise, but at the end of the tenure of what I was trying to do, I was writing a do or die letter. It's the final shot. I already know what the chances are. I'm just doing it to finish off my commitment to what I set out to do. And I must have wrote a 10-page love letter like that. And I was just like, oh, well, I cannot send all this. This is that's too much for me to read. So I condensed it. It took all night. It was weird, but it took all night to condense it. And to be honest with you, I can't remember if I got it to 3 or 4 pages. But I remember strategically all that was the first time in a long time the writing. You've seen the notes I have for this interview, all over the place. That was the first time in a long time, and I've done it before. I was good at writing notes to friends, like heartfelt letters, making sure they're okay. But that was the best interpretation of your quote I could think of from my experience of like, this is what I'm trying to say, this is what I'm doing. And if I think about it now, the only thing I can remember is there's a lot I should say and there's a lot I'm not gonna say. Let's get into it. So, what's a piece of writing that reflects your quote?
Well, first of all, lucky lady who would have gotten the 10-page love letter. If I got that, oh my gosh, that's what every girl wants, I feel like. But anyway, I was just astounded.
We'll talk about that later.
Funny, I like that. But yes, a piece of writing. Um, Honestly, it's hard because I say like pieces molded into life's mosaic of memories and moments. And I feel like my friend recently described it to me, and I don't know why I haven't thought of that yet, but she said writing is how I process and move on, like it's how I live and breathe. And and I think that's so true, and I believe that I feel like every piece of writing aligns with that quote, in the sense of every piece of writing is a step that I need to take to move forward and mold it into that mosaic. So for example, my poetry book now is just a complete snapshot of the past 4 years of my life in different poems. And I'm a person where or I'm a poet, I guess, in a sense of poets never really move on. They just kind of resurface different memories and rehash them to write about them. And I feel like this book is me, in a sense, closing a chapter of my life, and I'm ready to move on to the next one. Same for blog posts, like blogs, me going through different genres of blogs and writing different things. For example, a lot of my blogs and commentaries and writings dealt with philosophical content or art forms or album reviews, just because that was me at that time. All writings are pretty much diary entries in a way, where it gives you a glimpse of who you were in a particular moment of life. So I would say almost all of my writings kind of deal with that comment, to where they're things that I need to step on and step forward from, that kind of launch me into another season.
I love that you said it like all your writings are like the snap and picture, because I was listening to NPR. There's a gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he wrote his book on surviving the AIDS epidemic, what it was like for a gay man back then, and just his experiences with his deceased boyfriend and his partner, and just what it was like to live at that time. And he's writing about it, and he mentioned it was kind of weird to feel like he was going back in time, not just remembering it, but it was like, no, this is not what we have now compared to back then and 9/11. And he was throwing out a lot of thoughts I found interesting. But like you said, snap shots of memory and etc. Stupid Snapchat stuck on my tongue. So, for me, I've had a lot of setbacks that when I think about my career, even now, of the many great accomplishments I've had, grace of God, every last one of them was the Lord. It's really weird how the most crippling moments were at the beginning of my career. And these are things I hold on to. Some spitefully, I won't lie. There's some stuff I messed up on that I thought I could have done better. There's other things where no matter what happened, I was burned. It wasn't my fault, but I still got the brunt of it. So I was curious to see what were some of those moments where something happened where you were just distraught. You lost out on a writing, somebody tore it to bits, and then what was the next win?
This is answering your question, but kind of not answering your question. So, my main thing that I struggled with and still do, in the sense of vocation and writing, is the money aspect of it. It takes a lot of money to run a business, especially when you're a college student and you're trying to raise money for yourself to pay rent, or to get business cards, or to market a targeted ad on Instagram. And this kind of goes back to when I first started writing. A lot of money that I was saving up was, I used to work at this little pizza shop down in Wilmore, and it was a crazy place. Actually, there were two of us. My friend Parker and I, we were like 19, 20 at the time, and we actually pretty much ran the business. And the owners didn't even tell us that the business closed. I was on vacation, and I heard it from my friend, and I was like, okay, I guess that's that. But anyway, that's a rabbit trail. But anyway, I guess that kind of lumps into my story, where this pizza shop that I was saving up so much money to kind of help me with my degree, with my writing, submitting articles is not cheap. Submitting poetry is not cheap. And I was kind of saving up money, and all of a sudden the pizza shop closed. And I was like, oh God, like, what am I going to do? I'm out of job. I mean, eventually I need to get a job that focuses on writing, in a sense, but I never really thought of it at that time, because I'd only been writing for a handful of months. And then about probably a week later, someone comes up to me and they're like, strategic communications at Asbury is wanting a writer, and they know your name, and they're interested in you possibly writing for them. And so immediately I was like, okay, so this is a divine intervention here. Like, it's clearly my pizza shop days of flinging pizzas and making pizza sauces over, and now I have to actually work on my profession. And so immediately I started the job at Strategic Communications, and that is my first week of working there was on an Amazon Prime show, the college tour. And it really, that's what helped me kind of figure out that I wanted to be in film. And they helped me touch on every single aspect of what I'm now involved with. So I started writing for the magazine. I wrote press releases. I worked on films and TV shows. I attended events. I interviewed the university president all the time. Like it was perfect. And that was a setback, but that was also my biggest win, because without that job closing and without that job opening, I think I would be in the same spot, but it would have taken me a very long time to get there.
Take it from me, it would have taken a long time. Just play, because Mira, that I'm so happy to hear that, because I remember struggling to get my opportunities, and even so, like it's a longer story, because the ladder to success, like there was a lady I was watching one time. She had a TED talk, and she interviewed Keanu Reeves in the '90s. She was still in school. She met him. She's like, "Hey, I really want to interview." He's like, "Call me in the morning." Being Keanu, we got back to her. They did the interview. Great resume builder. Still couldn't get a job, no matter where she go. And I'm like, yo, she got video proof. What more do you need in the '90s? So for it to, when you're ready, God puts you in that place. And I'm happy that it's just kind of flying for you. Not aggravated. It took me a while, but either way. But Mira, it seems like that was the perfect catalyst to kind of expand everything for you. What would be the goals now? Because again, guys, I cannot stress it enough with words. I have to be serious about that. She sent an email with her resume of just different things she did, and I was just blown away that I couldn't formulate a proper way to address it in an intro or in the questions. I had to like snip pieces and just put it in question form. So what are the goals now that you have to expand your business? And as you said, you're doing communications now. Is movies the prime objective, or maybe an Inquirer, the New York Times, etc.?
Honestly, goals for my freelance business wise, I'm really hoping to kind of figure out a balance between an outside job and my freelancing, because I'm realizing very quickly that it's going to take a good chunk of years to be freelancing full time. But eventually, a goal is to not so much be a full time freelancer, but have this sense of I would like to travel for my job, or I would like to work on my own hours, which I already do now to a certain extent. I have a part-time job, and then I just freelance in my free time. So it could be 2 a.m. when I work on a project for a client, or it could be 1 in the afternoon. It really doesn't matter, which is pretty nice. So I would say a goal is to maintain that for freelancing. Branching off into other aspects, film is definitely something that I liked doing, because last year around this time, I worked on a pretty big project, and we just did a film lock on it. It's called That Groovy Rotten Smell by Midnight Centennial. And I was a producer, a unit production coordinator, and I also, at the time for their previous film, I did public relations for that. So I'm pretty much, I have experience enough to work on films in the future, whether that's an idea that I would not like to take with me, or something that could be a possibility in the future. I don't know. But if someone were to approach me and say, hey, we need a producer on this film, it's set to air in 2025, would you like to do that? I would probably jump at that. I think film would be a great avenue for me, just because a lot of times, even I have to realize that the jobs that I do outside of my freelancing business need to be a little more active than just writing, because when writing gets to be the thing you're doing for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, you want to stop writing, and your creativity kind of just goes out the window. So I think more active roles, such as like social media marketer, content creator, really any kind of film or anything like that, I would jump at the chance. So hopefully the goals are to find that balance between the writing portions that I'm good at, and also the more active, involved positions.
So how do you decompress? Because music, as much as I love it, it's not a job. And same thing, if somebody offered me like, "Hey, come play with us," I'm already here, bro. I just quit my job. What are you talking about? School? What? You know, but I don't have that. That's always been my sense of release. And it took a while for me to truly understand it. Back to another story, which we'll mention later after the interview. But there was a time where something was so stored in me. And I kind of was in denial about the whole situation. It wasn't, nobody was getting hurt. I wasn't hurting somebody. But the way I was feeling about that situation, I was kind of, downplaying, like, no, this is what it is. And the reality of it was, yes, that is what it was, but I wasn't expressing my feelings for it. And after whatever happened, it took like maybe a year or two where every day I would come home and I would have not just select songs, but I would just dive into music, drums, bass, guitar, you know, it was a very cathartic thing. Oh, you work out, you do this and that, but that was my sanctuary of sanity, of decompressing, dealing with those emotions and etc. And writing is like that for you. But when you get into a phase where that's all you do over and over again, how would you step away and decompress when you can't go to that thing? What's your release when writing can't be that reset?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I've had so many times where I've had to stop all writing for a couple of days at least, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's like, oh, maybe you should take a couple weeks off. But in reality, when it's multiple of your jobs and your craft, you really have to watch out how long you take off. But I've had to step away for days before and like just not look at anything. I've had a whole day where I just won't look at words like at all, just because I can't cope. I can't deal with it. It just gets me thinking about like poetry or I should write this blog. And it's very, yeah, it's very difficult to navigate that when it's your life in a way. And it's all about work-life balance, which I very much believe that when you're starting out in the business industry and you want to build your professional image, you really shouldn't have a work-life balance to where most of your activity during the day and possibly throughout the night would be work. So when I first started, I remember the first year that I was really writing and really trying to build my credibility, I would schedule all-nighters like once a week, like, oh, this Thursday is going to be my all-nighter. And at times I would walk into my dorm and fall flat on my face and just kind of take a nap on the floor. I did that multiple times a week. And there was just no work-life balance. But in reality, you do have to overwork yourself, and you have to, as in my personal case, you have to write all of the time. Now, more so that I am established as a writer and I kind of have clients coming to me at times to where I can take that break and I can take those days off and say, you know what, I'm just not even going to write because I know I'm going to get upset or angry at what I write, and I'm just not going to be able to produce the content that I want to.
The one movie that really garnished you like a reputation beyond just like, man, again, flabbergasted at the work you've done, but Don't Forget Us, that documentary that won an award, and it was a remembrance of the Holocaust, and you got to travel, you got to immerse yourself in a very dark part of history, which a lot of people aren't aware of. Some people ridiculously deny it. Like, it's one of those things. It's like, oh, slavery wasn't that bad, the Holocaust wasn't that bad, and you're like, how are you saying this crazy statement
Yeah.
with the proof of the loss of life and the pain that was shared? So I had to ask, because I know you were on Kentucky's version of Fox News, even though Philly's a little better. Good Day Philly, shout out.
Yeah.
But could you walk me through what you took most from that?
To give a little more context, I was offered to have a position as a lead commentary writer on our journalism department's feature film Don't Forget Us. So me and a group of 4 other journalism students who are great in their specific craft, we all formed a film crew, and we flew to Europe, specifically Germany and Poland, to film and write a documentary about the Holocaust concentration camp sites. So we went to Sachsenhausen, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and the Brandenburg Euthanasia Institute. So a lot that I was, oh my goodness, there's just so much compacted into that trip. We were there for, I want to say 12 days, 10 to 12. And it was just a lot that I got out of it. Was the biggest thing when we were flying into Munich, Germany, we had a flight delay. So they just kept delaying our flight and we missed a whole day of the trip, a reset day to where we could kind of relax and jet lag could kick in. And we were up for 36 hours. And immediately when we were up for 36 hours, we flew in. And once we got to the hotel, we had to set our stuff down and we were like on our first project. And it was, we had to film. I had to write my commentary that day. And we just had to turn this button on. Like we were jet lagged. We were in a different country. We were in a euthanasia institute that day, which was just a horrible environment to be in. We were just tired. And it's one of those things where you really learn that no matter how you're feeling, when you're on a project and when you're travel writing or even just writing here, you learn to be on in a way that you're not doing the work, like something inside of you is producing this work for you. So in my first year or two of writing, I kind of had this bad writing philosophy that, you have to be in a writing mood to write, or you have to be in this creative headspace. But in reality, that trip on that film with filming and writing, I learned that no matter how much I'm feeling like horrible, or if I don't have an idea, or if I have imposter syndrome, because who am I, just a little writer from Kentucky writing about the Holocaust and the horrible things that these victims endured during this time. It's kind of something you just have to push aside and you say, all right, I'm here, I'm on work, I have to be on, I have to produce content, and this is just how it's going to go. And it's very otherworldly when you push yourself to that degree, because that was almost every day for 10 to 12 days. So that was probably easily the best takeaway and the most rewarding thing that I could think about. Was it totally changed my perspective on how I produce content.
So for us, I don't know if you remember Mrs. Cavallo. When they were doing a play for the Holocaust, I was sneaking in trying to like cross across the gym so I wouldn't have to go the long way. And she caught me. She's like, "What are you doing in here?" I was like, "Oh, I'm just here to see if I can audition still." And she gave me a role in a Holocaust play, and I was the rabbi.
Was
Yeah,
that I Never Saw Another Butterfly?
I won't lie to you, I have no idea. I just
Okay.
I remember thinking like I'm getting out of detention for this.
Oh my goodness.
So, but the thing was, I just remember feeling so bad afterwards because what happened was basically I was a walk on. So they dressed me up, they gave me the script and the scroll. I'm just this random, apparently the only one that got to keep his clothes on rabbi in the concentration camp while they're getting married, and I do my lines. I read it right off the paper. And I'm not taking a whiz with it, but I'm kind of like, I'm just going through the motions. But I'm trying my best to, people came here to see this play, act, But I won't disclose whose mom walked up to me afterwards, after the second performance. But I had a mom walk up that survived the Holocaust, or at least had family in it. And she was crying hysterically, thanking me for my performance, saying that I did such a good job and I was so in tune with the source material and everything like that. And I kind of felt taken back, because you feel for her. That's unmeasurable pain. But to have that effect of like, hey, I gave her a little bit of solace, I helped her out. That always made me realize like you have to be careful when you're putting on the show regardless. It wasn't like I was like, oh, this is nothing, just do it. I gave it the best I could, but if I knew that would have happened, I would have been like, well, at least let me memorize the lines instead of reading them. Did you receive any type of, reach out from somebody for that film, or even with your own writing? Say you just did something on the side at school and somebody that was in a dark place was like, hey, you have no idea, this helped me so much.
Oh my goodness. Yes. In relation to the film, even before we had a rough cut of the film, or even before we filmed, we had multiple people come up to us, and it was very not funny, but a coincidence that even our flight delay to Munich, we had several people come up and kind of just engage in conversation with us. And we learned that someone in their family was a Holocaust survivor, or like their parents were in the Holocaust, or something. So we were getting kind of micro doses of encouragement throughout that thing, and just great conversation with people that you would never guess that they were, involved in the Holocaust somehow, because they're just in a random airport in like Newark, New Jersey or something. And but after the film, and our premiere, we definitely had a lot of students at the college reach out. And there was one specific, I wish I had it in front of me, but one student kind of basically said like their lives they were changed throughout this, and they didn't take on the idea that it was just so all encompassing and so horrific until they watched the documentary. And it's just, that was probably the best piece of encouragement that we felt as a film crew, for someone to reach out, because that's the main crux of the documentary. Is you grow up and you learn about these events in history books, and they're just events. They're just, I don't know if you remember my dad's history red flags. I always think of that when I say that, because red flags basically like vocab for history. Like one of your red flags questions was, what was the Holocaust, and how many like people were sent from X to Y or whatever. And it's just test memorization basically, and you don't really get a sense of what, not if you don't take the time to understand it, you don't get a sense of what's going on. And as high schoolers, you're never going to delve into anything, because we never cared about anything as high schoolers. So it's a documentary that really showcases a horrific event in history, and gives us this respect for it, but also memorializes it in a way that it can live on. Because a lot of our Holocaust survivors, they're getting to the age where there's not many left, and we're going to enter a decade when no survivors exist on Earth. They can't tell their stories anymore. So it's so important to tell stories that can live on and impact the younger generation, who just perceive this as something in a textbook and not actually happening. And it can happen again.
The thing I always take away from these things, like for me, I'm very sensitive to pretty much every atrocity, slavery, racism, anything that's directed towards like the Armenian genocide, etc. It's I've been fortunate to have friends and family and just walks of life where no matter what happens, there's no way I can disconnect from it. Somebody shoots up a gay club in Orlando. Well, you know what? My best friend's in Orlando. He might be straight, but you know what? My mom's dance teacher, him and his husband just got married. So that's me. I just shot up a rock concert, or these people died to the government doing this. I've always had this connection and understanding with all of it, and the films, especially like when you see on the History Channel, that's always brought me back to this. Like, okay, I already understand this, but I know that somebody else can't really convey this thought and feeling that I have, and that's what those movies and documentaries do. They bring it to light and life for somebody who doesn't have that connection to it happening, But it is powerful that you guys were able to experience that, especially you took away from that. You just got to be on, you kind of just go for it. But this is one I really was curious about, because Miss Trinity and you are like best friends, went to the same high school, and I'm like, that talk about having the best of luck. Like everybody I met, I had to leave and reach out to, but you guys went to school together. So walk me through that interview, because for a lot of people who don't know, she's a CEO and does a nonprofit, and she has her hand in a lot too. But I found it interesting that like reading your interview, it's a craft. That's one I'm still trying to master, but I look up to a lot of dudes that are good at interviews, a lot of NPR people like Terry Crews, Back to Philadelphia, Pierre Robert, Howard Stern, even though he gets a bad rep for how vulgar he was. These people have this ability to ask the right questions and put the person in a headspace of comfortability, where they can be open and say things they necessarily wouldn't, you know. And I got that from your interview, even though it was in the written form, which is extremely difficult. So walk me through how you guys knew each other, how you approached the interview. If she gave you some money on the side, you know, let me know.
Yeah, so after we graduated high school, we were still on good terms, but we never really thought that we were going to get involved in projects together like we are now. And before I started my initial freelancing business, everyone knew that I was writing. So Trinity actually reached out to me, and she and her nonprofit became my client. One of my public relations clients, where I would write press releases or attend events and write about it. So for about 2 years before this past interview in March, I was writing for her and her nonprofit. So I had an idea, I had a very intimate knowledge of what the nonprofit was, what her personal story was, because I had to write about it so consistently through those press releases and like website copy and everything. So approaching the interview, I knew that she had a demographic wanting to know about the nonprofit, because nonprofits are always about, can someone financially support this cause? And my demographic being people who want to freelance, or people who want to interview or just hear about the entrepreneurial business. And and so putting those two together, we formulated this idea of, okay, Women's Month, upstarting a business. Let's see where this takes us. So I formulated questions. And when you're formulating questions, you really have to think about what's going to engage and interest your audience. Because last year I read a statistic, I want to say in video, the average attention span is about 5 seconds. And without video content, just writing, like you said, you read the blog and the interview, writing is a different beast. You are trying to get your audience's attention for, I mean, up to probably 10 minutes of solid reading and understanding. So you really want to get something that's going to lock your audience in, because they're taking time out of their day to read your stuff. So it has to be engaging. So I went with the angle of, okay, there's a lot of people wanting to take control of their career and kind of upstart something that they're passionate about. Let's talk about someone who's young and who started from the ground up and owns this fantastic nonprofit and runs it, and she's doing so well. She's amazing. Like you give her any question and she'll know what to say. Like she says, she's so humble. She's like, I don't really know how to do this, but she does. So any question that I gave her, she was just on the nose, great answers. So I kind of went with, okay, what are we going to supply to our audience that not a lot of people can offer? And with her, it was upstarting a nonprofit at the age of 18.
And you know, a lot of people don't know. We didn't really stress it, but it is for disabled children and helping them through writing and etc. You know, what kind of hands-on work have you had to do with that nonprofit, and actually going to talk to the parents and dealing with the kids? You know, it's a totally different beast for a lot of people, because they're very uncomfortable with this idea of like they're just like us. But when they really get to it, it's just, you know what, depending on what the disability is, that person might be all there and here, they just can't express it out here, you know. Or maybe just because this kid doesn't have the ability to walk doesn't mean they don't feel or have the same emotions or etc. And I find it weird people disconnect that as well. You know, what was your experience working with the parents and helping out with the nonprofit while you were doing these projects?
So when I started working, mainly all of my information was being filtered through Trinity, and I was just putting it in writing form. But then as the years progressed, I started going to, she had an all-inclusive fashion show. So a lot of the kids dressed up in pretty dresses and tuxes and walked a fashion show at Landis Theater, I'm pretty sure.
In Kentucky?
No, in Jersey. Yes, it was Landis Theater in Millville. Is it in Millville?
So there's two. Landis is in Vineland, so think CCS City, and then next door is the Lavoy, which is in Millville.
It was Lavoy then. It was in Millville. So so yeah. So I don't know my geography, but yeah, basically I traveled to Jersey to visit the fashion show. And so, because I would be writing about it, but writing about something is very, you learn your clients and you learn their business and you learn the people that they affect and impact in their business. But attending events and being in the same room and really interacting with people is a totally different layer that you need to peel off when you're a publicist or you're writing press releases or website copy, blogs, anything. So you really need to get intimately involved. And I've always had kind of a soft spot for the disabled community because even just last year on the Holocaust film, the Brandenburg Institute for Euthanasia that we went to, their main target was the disabled. Like the Holocaust started out not with the Jewish community, but with the disabled community, euthanizing them because they thought they were not important to society, basically, which is ridiculous. But my dad also at the time, he was a caretaker for disabled adults.
Is there nothing your father hasn't done at this
My dad
point?
has done everything, I promise you.
Did he do UFC? Because I remember the last conversation we had, he was like, "Oh, I want to do it, but I don't know if I should do it." I'm like, "Bro, it's better to be a warrior and kill than not to be a warrior and get killed." And he's like, "Ah, that doesn't seem right, John." I was like, it's just he just keeps going.
Truly, he does. But yeah,
Mm.
so he was working as a caretaker for disabled adults. And there was this one man, and he was one of his attendees for the facility. And he would always kind of every single shift my dad had with him, he would always mention me. Like, oh, what's your daughter eating for dinner? Or, oh, what's your daughter doing tonight? And he was just so personable and sweet. And it's just, they're just so important. So I walked into writing for this nonprofit with this idea of, oh my gosh, they are just, they, they have a perspective in life that I don't think that we are on the level to experience. Like, I think that truly they have a better version of life in a way where they are not, let me take a second to phrase this correctly. They're experiencing things on a level that we are not because they laugh all of the time. Like you just see genuine happiness in their faces. Like when they see someone, their eyes light up because they're just so excited to see you. And I think there's this form of contentment that they have that we as people who experience like stress on different levels or our brains work differently than them, I think that we are missing out on a certain thing that they have. So I feel like working with this nonprofit, we're just like, I'm around a community that I value and I look up to so much, and I just want to help that through the writing. And I know Trinity sees that too. Like she sees the potential in all of them because they are just heroes. They really are. And that's why she writes them as superheroes, because they are heroes and it's awesome.
Yeah. But it takes a special heart to notice these things and being
Mhm.
I'm looking for another word that is not perceptive, but it's along the same lines. It's just being sensitive to it, seeing
Yes.
that.
Mhm.
So you may not just truly it's fun to go back and forth and see where you've come and where you're going. You know, who would you say is a writer? Like if I were to pick like music, ACDC, Iron Maiden, Eminem, and Redman or Biggie, it's vice versa. Those are the artists that no matter what, it's like when you put on for me, for some reason, gospel music or at least worship music, like if I'm in a bad mood and somebody starts playing it, you know, I'll go from cussing to not cussing without noticing it. Like it just has a calming effect. Those
Mhm.
musicians, same thing. I hear it, it brings a sense of peace for whatever reason and whatever mood. Who are some writers that you find solace in? Some of your favorite writers that you go
Mhm.
to when you're just like, hey, I love this. This is my favorite.
So like I said, I did not enjoy reading in high school, and I still barely read, shockingly enough. But so one of the most recent books that I read was Poem Crazy by Susan Goldsmith Wooldridge. And she is just a visionary. Like her writings on poetry and her guided practices for that are just so important. And I think she approaches writing in a refreshing way where she writes prose or like sentence structure, like just different book writing as poetry. So every sentence that she writes is pretty much a line of poetry. And I think she's just fantastic in the sense. And up on my wall, I have like a bunch of poems because I look at them when I'm writing. But I like Carl Phillips. He's a very good poet, and he's just a lot of poets I find that I gravitate towards are just very like blunt and authentic, and they're not super wordy or crafty with their words. They say it how it is, which I think is fantastic and special. But a lot of people like Susan Goldsmith Woolbridge and what's this book on? Natalie Goldberg. She's another one. She has Writing Down the Bones. So Writing Down the Bones and Poem Crazy. If any writers are listening to this or watching this, you read their books because you're gonna lose your mind. It's good.
That sounds like a hell of a title for a song. Riding down the bus.
There you go. Yep.
What is a compliment you got that gave you that light of just encouragement? It wasn't just like somebody said it and rolled off the back. It's like, I got it.
So very recently, at the end of my poetry class, we were breaking for the summer, and on our last day of presenting like our poetry chapbooks, our professor gave us specialized poetry books and kind of this little, it was like a windmill, but it had a little note on it that kind of read what kind of poet you were. And I have it here. And she's just an amazing mentor and encourager to me, but she gave me the confessional award. And she said that like my writing was super like sophisticated and in a way where I confess things and I bring up topics that are controversial and very deep to the human condition and how we feel and act during our time of growing up. And she just said that it's just done so well. And she gave me this book here, The Wellspring by Sharon Olds. And she said verbatim, and I'll never forget this. She said, I would not give this book to really anyone, but I trust that Maddie will use it in a good way. And she's like, this is just kind of your writing in a sense, and you deserve to read this book. So I started reading, and it's such an impactful book, and the poetry is just so good, and it's so complimentary to see that she kind of views me in a sense where I can handle a book like this because it's so good. And that was an encouragement that I just think about every time I'm very discouraged writing poetry. If I think that a line isn't avant-garde enough, or if something just isn't clicking, or I just kind of open this book and look at her little tag that she gave me. And I think it's just so forming for me as a poet.
Mate, I always end these with the most important question. You touched on it a little bit, but there's always a piece of advice, a word of advice that sticks with us. Somebody says it and it could have been serious or it could have been nonchalant. Mine was Ted Aguilar of Death Angel. I did an interview with him. I asked him and he said, just live. And it was almost prophetic of what he said. He said, just live. I know people on their deathbeds that, they have regret. Like, life is a party. Just do your best not to hurt somebody. But in the meantime, you're going to, just do your best to enjoy it. Get what you can out of it. And at the time, I took that to heart, and especially with Corona and everything else that's happening, that's kind of been a guiding light. And then of course I talked to guys I'm like highly suspect. He's like, yeah, rent a tour bus, don't buy one, man. That's my advice. Like, what's a piece of advice you heard that you didn't come up with it, somebody else said it, but it rings in your mind every now and again, like, this is important to try and remember as I go through my life?
Yeah, one of my mentors, he gave me one of his books. His name is Jay McCord, and he in the little in like the preface of the book on the page, he wrote, "Never look down on a day of small beginnings." And I think that is just so amazing to think about in the span of anything that you're doing. If you're in business, if you're writing, or if you're on the film set, or anything, every single aspect or project that you are on is another small beginning that'll lead you to something very important. For an example, recently, I don't know if you've heard of Kinfolk magazine, but they are just a international magazine written in 4 languages, distributed to over like 100 countries, and they're just huge. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply to Kinfolk and see if I can get this editor job that they have remotely. And so I applied, and obviously, because they're so huge, I did not get the position. Bummer, as a 22-year-old just starting entrepreneur. But my small beginning in that was realizing that in their application process, I actually reached all of the credentials that they had in the application. For example, one of them was be a highly like kind of lead editor for a magazine for like up to 3 years. And shockingly enough, I realized that I had kind of earned my way through the ranks, and I'm now a lead editor of Ambassador magazine at Asbury. So it's one of those things where I did not get the job, but just having that confidence and realizing that I even reached the credentials or the possibility of even applying for the job is a huge beginning and feat that I think deserves to be celebrated. That's not really something that should deserve to be celebrated in the pessimistic sense of, oh, I didn't get the job. But I think never looking down on a day of small beginnings. I think every small aspect, there's a celebration that is deserved in that.
That was beautifully well said. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Maddie. I call her Miss Madison Anderson. She is a freelance writer. She's a movie producer, magazine editor, newspaper editor, you name it. She's actually legitimately have had her hand on it. You can find her online. First things first, the email is madisonfreelancer@gmail.com. So type that in first, and then we're going to go to madison.org so you can check out her business profile and everything. Give them the rest of the links. Give them everything else. How else can we find you? What's the number? What's the LinkedIn? Throw it out there.
LinkedIn should be Madison Anderson. My business email is mandersonfreelancer@gmail.com. Website, like you said, madisonanderson.org. And really all of my socials are tagged on my website or on anything that you find. So if you go to one avenue, you're going to find all the rest of them.
Awesome. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John the Ninja. Don't forget to like, subscribe. More importantly, look at the links below with all that information for Maddie. And then, I think that's it. It was so great talking to you again.
Me too. I know.
Thank you so much for coming. And everybody else, as always, you know the rules. Be smart, be mindful, rock on. That's about it. Ninja out.
Hi guys, I'm Madison Anderson. I own a freelance writing business. I'm a 4-time published poet, and I write blogs on marketing yourself and gaining your professional image. And you're watching John the Ninja.
I'm going to leave that little part in there too, that pullback.
The pullback, the insecure pullback.
Mira, that was lovely. All right, so last.
Woo, baby, you listen to John the Ninja. All your ears are about to go on a vacation. John the Ninja's got what you need.